Well, I do vote because I think it's important to have a say in what goes on in this country. So for the bigger elections, I'm always completely in tune, but I don't vote in some of the local elections or some of the smaller off-year elections because I don't know anyone else who knows about them, and so I never have anyone reminding me that they're coming up. I don't know any of the issues that are being discussed. I'm pretty disengaged with what goes on in the local political community.
To vote, fact of the matter is nobody's ever informed enough to really make a completely informed vote. Okay. And so what you really need to do is know enough about what issues you care about, where the candidates and the parties, and those two things are sometimes different, where they stand on the issues you care about, and which of those candidates stands closest to where your views are, that you have some confidence that they're going to act in a way that you would like to see them act. Okay. And some of that is to also know a little bit about them as people, so that because people will say, candidates will say something, but you also, some issues come up that you were never prepared for. Nobody ever talked about terrorism in the 2000 election. Right. And so knowing something about how the candidates might react in those situations is helpful. Mm-hmm. How do you get informed enough to do that is a really tricky thing. Yeah. Nobody expects young people or people more generally to spend all their time studying, like the Talmud sort of way the candidates stand on issues. Yeah. But it's, we can sometimes exaggerate how much work it is to find that out. If there are people or organizations you trust and they say this is the right candidate, even that's really helpful. Mm-hmm. But paying a little bit of attention to the news, feeling like you know what the parties and the candidates stand for, at least in broad strokes, mm-hmm. is oftentimes enough to really be able to go out there and cast a reasonably informed vote, I think.
Okay. So you talked a little bit about getting to know the candidate as a person. Like, right. How would you do that besides like scheduling an appointment and meeting him or her, for example? Right. Is there any way that you can do that without personally meeting someone?
It's hard because the candidates' images, especially at the national level, are so managed, mm-hmm. and every interaction you have with them is through the media in one way or another. But you can often tell at the even the national level. Debates are really useful for that because they're a little less structured. They're still pretty structured, but mm-hmm. a little less structured. Hearing what they have to say in a press conference can be really telling. Mm-hmm. Reading just a little bit of better biographies. I don't mean a book, but I mean oftentimes the candidates will put out an ad that says, this is the background of this candidate. They can be sort of useful, but more importantly is when a newspaper article or a magazine article tells you a little bit of something. And sometimes you can find out about them and how they react in less formal settings. So when they happen, which candidates do more and more, show up on a talk show or on a show like The Daily Show, for example, you can sometimes get an inkling of what they're like as people.
Right. So what do you think, though, about like newspaper bias? Because I feel like if I read the New York Times, but about a opinion or article, even a news article about a candidate, but then I read something my dad sent me from the Wall Street Journal about a candidate, I get totally different pictures.
Right. This is a dilemma of the new media environment we live in that there's not an easy answer to. Mm-hmm. Every media outlet is only going to be able to do so much, but some are more biased than others. So number one, know the political point of view of the media outlet that you're looking at. Mm-hmm. I mean, the difference between Fox News's bias in a conservative direction and the New York Times bias in a liberal direction is dramatic. New York Times is made up of professional journalists who are at least trying to be unbiased. They don't always succeed, but they're trying. Fox News, their bias is on their sleeve. I mean, they won't admit it, but they're a conservative news outlet. And so you should know that. Doesn't mean don't watch it. Right. It just means know that you're getting the information. There's a lot of interest in political satire right now, mainly because of Jon Stewart and The Daily Show. Yeah. Let me say right off the bat that if I were going to list 2 or 3 things that people in general or young people should watch with some regularity, The Daily Show would be on that list. Okay. And so your sense of trust in him, I think you should always have healthy skepticism of anybody in the media. Right. And certainly Stewart likes to play it both ways because he says he's a comedian. He won't acknowledge that he has any journalistic role, and yet he plays a really important journalistic role. And it's a little bit of a cop-out to act like I don't have any responsibility here.
Right.
I think he knows he does.
Yeah.
But a few things about the Daily Show. We shouldn't put satire all in the same bucket, that some are good and some are bad. I think the Daily Show with Jon Stewart is one of the best. If you watch The Daily Show regularly, you will, number one, be entertained. But while you're being entertained, a couple of things look like they happen. One is you actually do get a lot of information from them. Less from the monologue and more from the interviews that he does, but they are really informative.
Yeah.
Number two, in order to get the joke, you sort of have to know a little bit more. And so it turns out there was a study that was done not that long ago, done here at Annenberg. There was a knowledge test given to people through a survey, and then we found out where they got their information from, and regular Daily Show viewers scored the highest on these political knowledge questions. Not so much because they get the information from the Daily Show alone, but because if you watch it, you probably care enough about these issues that you're paying attention, and if you watch it and aren't that interested in the issues, when he says something, you go and look it up afterwards.
Right.
At a minimum, choose one mainstream media outlet and pay attention to it. And for me, the New York Times or the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal. The Wall Street Journal's editorial policies are very conservative, but their news reporting, while it tends to be more just about economic news, is among the best in the country. So one kind of national print, ideally, you can read it online, but a print medium. A show like The Daily Show, and then one opinion blog that you care about, that kind of fits your views and cares about your issues. Then you can kind of sample other stuff and through social networking get other people to tell you, hey, you should check this out. But I think that, alone, you don't have to spend a lot of time on them, but those are three really good ways to take advantage of the media environment we live in right now. The hardest part, though, is in this environment as a citizen, you have to be a news grazer. You have to, you don't have to know, you have to read everything in depth, but you got to make an effort to say, okay, if most of my sources tend to be progressive or liberal, let me just check in a little bit on what a more conservative source is saying, just so I can get a little bit of a different picture.
Okay.
And then the last thing I'd say is, even if you're only paying attention to one or two sources, don't just consider the bottom line, but consider the argument. Right. And so if you feel like they got to telling you something without giving you a lot of evidence, or without making a very logical argument, then that tells you a little something.